Thanksgiving used to be my favorite day of the year. For 32 years, I was the one who woke up before sunrise. I basted the turkey. I peeled 10 pounds of potatoes. I ironed the linen tablecloth my mother gave me when I got married. That house, the one on Willow Creek Drive, it held every memory of my adulthood. And that night, as the golden light from the dining room chandelier reflected off the crystal glasses, I truly believed we were still a family. My son sat at the head of the table. His wife, my daughter-in-law, Amanda, wore a soft cream sweater and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The grandchildren were laughing. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air. I remember thinking, maybe this year will be different. Maybe this year, she will finally see me as more than just his mother. Dinner was almost over when I noticed it. A small ivory card, folded neatly, placed directly on my plate. Not handed to me, not explained, just placed there. I thought it was a Thanksgiving note. Perhaps something sweet. Perhaps the children had written it. I opened it slowly. Inside, in Amanda's careful handwriting, it said, "Family trip next week. You'll stay and clean the house before we're back. No, please. No, thank you. No conversation. Just instructions." For a moment, the room went very quiet in my ears. Not because anyone stopped talking, but because something inside me did. I looked up. Amanda was sipping her wine. My son was carving the last of the turkey. No one was watching me. Even the nanny, who had been with them for only 6 months, was smiling as she scrolled through her phone. They had already planned everything. The flights, the resort, the babysitting schedule. And me. I was part of the schedule. Not the trip. The cleaning. I folded the card carefully, smoothed it once with my palm. Then I smiled. "Have a wonderful vacation," I said gently. Amanda looked relieved. My son nodded, as if I had just agreed to water the plants. No one asked how I felt. No one said I didn't have to. Because in their minds, this house was already theirs. They forgot something. I was the one who made the down payment in 1998. I was the one who paid off the last $42,000 after my husband passed. I was the one whose name remained on the deed. They lived there, but it was still my home. That night, after everyone left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I walked slowly into my study. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the brass handle. Inside were the documents. Property deed, insurance papers, the trust agreement my late husband and I had created. I ran my fingers over my name. Margaret and Whitmore, sole owner. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply picked up my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "My house," I said calmly when he answered. "I think it's time we reviewed the paperwork." And for the first time that evening, I felt something stronger than humiliation. I felt clarity. They were leaving for a week. They thought I would be dusting baseboards while they posted beach photos online. They had no idea what I was about to clean out of that house. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had to roast a turkey. Not because grandchildren were running through the hallway. But because clarity does not let you sleep long. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Amanda and my son had left at 5:30 a.m. for their flight to Cabo. I heard the SUV pull out of the driveway while I stood behind the curtain in the living room. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. In their minds, I wasn't part of the trip. I was part of the cleanup crew. I made myself coffee. Black. No sugar. Then I sat at the kitchen island, the same island I paid $18,000 to remodel 10 years ago, and opened my laptop. At 8:15 a.m., my attorney called me back. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm and familiar. "I reviewed your file." I didn't rush him. I've learned that silence makes professionals speak more clearly. "The property deed is solely in your name," he continued. "Your son was never added. There was no transfer. No survivorship clause." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not out of sadness. Out of confirmation. And the trust. I asked. "Still under your control?" he said. "You're the grantor. Nothing changes unless you change it. Nothing changes unless I change it." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. For the first time in years, I realized something uncomfortable. I had given them authority emotionally, but not legally, and they confused the two. By noon, I was in the study again. I pulled out every document. Mortgage payoff confirmation, tax records, insurance policies, utility accounts. Every single bill was under my name. They had lived comfortably. They had redecorated the guest bedroom, installed new patio furniture, even hired a nanny, all under the assumption that the house would one day be theirs. But assumptions are not ownership. That afternoon, I drove downtown. The air was crisp, late November wind, the kind that reminds you winter is close. I met my attorney in person. We didn't speak dramatically. We didn't whisper like conspirators. We reviewed facts. Margaret, he said, folding his hands, if you feel taken advantage of, you have options. Options. I hadn't thought about options in years. I had thought about harmony, about keeping peace, about not making things difficult. But peace without respect is not peace. It's surrender. I want to update the trust, I said calmly. He nodded. And the house. I took a breath. Yes, I said. The house too. We discussed timelines, procedures, notifications, everything legal, everything proper. No tricks, no revenge drama, just paperwork. By Wednesday, the documents were drafted. By Thursday, they were signed. By Friday morning, the locksmith arrived. He was a polite man in his 40s. Didn't ask questions. Just did his job. All exterior locks were replaced. Front door, back door, garage entry. I watched carefully as he tested each key. Smooth, secure, final. That evening, I walked slowly through every room. The living room, the staircase, the master bedroom that had once belonged to my husband and me. Memories live in walls, but ownership lives on paper. And on paper, it was still mine. Amanda posted beach photos that night. I saw them online. White sand, blue water, cocktails with tiny umbrellas. Caption, much needed family reset read hard. I smiled at that. Reset. Yes, that was exactly what this was. They thought I would be scrubbing baseboards while they relaxed under palm trees. Instead, I was resetting boundaries, resetting power, resetting reality. By Sunday, everything was complete. The trust amended. The access codes changed. The garage remotes deactivated. I even updated the alarm system. Only one person had full authorization now. Me. I didn't feel anger. Anger is loud. This felt quiet. Precise. Monday afternoon, I received a text from my son. Landing in 2 hours. Can't wait to sleep in my own bed. My own bed. I looked around the living room. At the framed photo of my late husband. At the fireplace we built together. And I whispered softly to the empty room. We'll see. I placed the phone face down on the table. Then I waited. Not nervously. Not anxiously. Just patiently. Because sometimes, the most powerful response is letting someone discover what they never truly owned. I heard the SUV before I saw it. Tires rolling slowly over the gravel edge of the driveway. Laughter. Car doors slamming. Amanda's voice, bright, relaxed, sun-soaked. I remained seated in the living room. Hands folded neatly in my lap. The house was spotless. Not because I had scrubbed it for them, but because I have always kept my home clean. Footsteps approached the front door. A suitcase rolled across the porch. Then I heard it. The familiar metal click of a key entering the lock. A pause. Another twist. The handle rattled. Silence. Then a sharper jiggle. Confusion creeping into the air. Babe. Amanda's voice, slightly strained. It's not turning. My son tried. Once. Twice. Harder. The lock didn't budge. The new mechanism held firm. I stood slowly and walked toward the door. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just steady. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see their shapes. Tanned. Relaxed. Unprepared. My son knocked lightly at first. Mom. Another knock. Louder. Mom, are you home? I unlocked the deadbolt from inside. But I did not open the door fully. Just enough. The late November air slipped in. Cool. Sharp. Amanda blinked when she saw me. Her smile faded in stages. What's going on? She asked, trying to laugh. The key isn't working. I know, I said calmly. My son frowned. Did the lock break? No, I let that word sit there. Amanda's eyes moved past me into the living room. Everything looked the same. The same couch. The same family photos. The same fireplace. Except something invisible had shifted. I had the locks changed, I said. Silence. My son stared at me as if I had spoken another language. Why would you do that? He asked. Because you left me a note. Because you mistook kindness for weakness. Because you believed this house was already yours. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said something simpler. This house is still in my name. Amanda's expression hardened. We know that, she replied quickly. It's just paperwork. Paperwork. Interesting word choice. It is paperwork, I agreed. And I reviewed it very carefully last week. The nanny stood behind them, awkward and quiet, holding one of the children's backpacks. The children themselves were confused, shifting from foot to foot. My son stepped closer. Mom, what are you saying? I opened the door a little wider. Not to invite them in, just to stand taller. I'm saying, I continued evenly, that if I am expected to stay behind and clean this house while everyone else vacations, then we need to be very clear about who owns it. Amanda flushed. That note was a joke, she said quickly. You're overreacting. A joke. Written in ink. Planned in advance. No conversation attached. I held her gaze. I don't find displacement amusing, I replied softly. My son ran a hand through his hair. Mom, can we just go inside and talk? I considered that. For a long moment. Then I stepped back, but not fully. You may come in, I said carefully. But understand something first. They paused. This is not your house. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The air shifted. Authority has a temperature. And in that doorway, it turned cold. Amanda walked in slowly. Her sandals clicking against the hardwood floor I refinished 15 years ago. She looked around as if something might have physically changed. But nothing had. Except permission. My son closed the door behind them. It locked automatically. A soft click. Final. We've lived here for years, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. You have lived here. I walked toward the dining table. The same table where that small ivory card had been placed days earlier. I reached into the drawer and pulled it out. I placed it gently on the surface between us. The note, still folded neatly. I stayed, I said. I cleaned up something. Amanda's face went pale. My son swallowed. What did you do? He asked. I met his eyes. Calm. Clear. I corrected an assumption. Silence filled the room. Not chaotic. Not explosive. Heavy. They were no longer sun-soaked travelers returning home. They were guests standing in a house they never legally owned. And for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, they understood that my silence had never meant surrender. It meant preparation. No one sat down. That was the first thing I noticed. They didn't remove their coats. Didn't set their luggage aside. Didn't relax. Because something fundamental had shifted. Amanda was the first to speak. You're embarrassing us, she said quietly, but her voice carried an edge. Embarrassing. I almost smiled at that. I had been assigned the role of cleaner, of background support, of silent contributor. But now I was the embarrassment. I'm clarifying something, I replied calmly. My son stepped forward, lowering his voice. Mom, we live here. You reside here, I corrected gently. There is a difference. Residency can be granted. Ownership cannot be assumed. The children were led upstairs by the nanny. Even she sensed this was no longer a casual conversation. When we were alone, the room felt heavier. Amanda crossed her arms. So what is this? She asked. Some kind of lesson? I didn't answer immediately. Silence unsettles people who expect resistance. Instead, I walked toward the fireplace. Adjusted the frame of an old photograph. My husband and I, standing in front of this very house in 1998. It's not a lesson, I said finally. It's a boundary. My son exhaled sharply. You could have just talked to us. I waited for that, I replied. On Thanksgiving. That landed. Amanda's eyes flickered toward the dining table, toward the note still resting there. That was taken out of context, she said quickly. What context? I asked gently. Makes that appropriate? No one answered. Because there wasn't one. I moved toward the kitchen, ran my hand lightly across the granite island. I paid for this renovation, I said evenly. I refinanced after your father died to keep this house stable. I covered the property taxes every single year. I wasn't listing sacrifices. I was stating facts. You never corrected the assumption, I continued, turning to face them, that this house would automatically become yours. My son looked down. We just thought, he started. Yes, I said softly. You thought. Amanda shifted her weight. So what happens now? She asked. That was the real question. Not anger. Not pride. Control. I walked back to the dining table and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were copies. Revised trust documents. Updated occupancy agreement. Security code authorization. I amended the trust, I said. Amanda's breath caught. You did what? I amended it, I repeated calmly. The house will not transfer automatically. My son's face drained of color. Then who? That will be determined by respect, I said quietly. Silence again. This time not confused. Threatened. I am not evicting you, I added. But the terms have changed. Amanda's composure began to crack. You can't just scare us like this. I didn't, I replied. I secured what was already mine. My son rubbed his temples. What do you want, Mom? That question sounded different now. Not dismissive. Not impatient. Direct. I want acknowledgement, I said. I want conversation before decisions. I want gratitude instead of assumption. And I want it understood that I am not the help. Amanda opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. Because she knew. The note had crossed a line. Not loudly, but clearly. You're overreacting. She tried once more, softer this time. No, I said. I reacted appropriately. There is a difference. Outside, the late afternoon light dimmed. The house felt quiet again. But not the kind of quiet that follows humiliation. The kind that follows recalibration. My son finally spoke. We didn't mean to make you feel small. Intent does not erase impact. You did, I said plainly. And for the first time since they walked through that door, Amanda looked unsure. Not angry. Not defensive. Unsure. Because the power dynamic had shifted. They had expected compliance. Instead, they encountered clarity. I gathered the folder and placed it back into the drawer. The locks will remain changed, I said. You will receive keys once we establish understanding. Amanda's head lifted sharply. You're giving us conditions? I am setting standards, I corrected. Words matter. Tone matters. Ownership matters. My son nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand something Amanda had not yet fully grasped. This was not revenge. This was correction. You're serious, he said quietly. Yes, I answered. I walked toward the hallway. Paused. Then turned slightly. One more thing, I added. If you ever leave a note like that again, I didn't raise my voice. You may find that the house no longer accommodates extended stays. Amanda swallowed. Message received. Not shouted. Delivered. The children's footsteps echoed faintly upstairs. The nanny moved quietly in the guest room. Life continued. But the illusion had ended. And in that living room, on Willow Creek Drive, authority returned to its rightful place. Not because I demanded it, but because I remembered it was mine. That night, no one slept easily. I could hear movement upstairs. Closet doors opening. Soft footsteps. Whispers behind closed bedroom walls. Change makes noise before it makes peace. I remained in my room. The master bedroom still felt the same. Same oak dresser. Same quilt my sister stitched for me 20 years ago. But something inside the house had shifted permanently. Around 10:30 p.m., there was a knock on my door. Not loud. Not demanding. Just measured. Mom, my son's voice. Come in. He stepped inside alone. No, Amanda. That told me everything. He looked older than he had that afternoon. Vacation glow fading fast. I've been thinking, he began. I waited. Silence works better than interruption. We didn't mean to disrespect you, he said. It just happened. Disrespect rarely just happens. It grows quietly, fed by assumption. When did it start? I asked calmly. He frowned slightly. What? When did you begin believing this house was yours? He didn't answer immediately, because he couldn't pinpoint it. There was no single moment. Just years of comfort. Years of convenience. Years of me saying yes. You've always helped, he said finally. Yes, I replied. Helping is not surrender. And Amanda thought. He hesitated. Yes. She thought you wouldn't mind. There it was. The core truth. She thought. She never asked. Your wife left me a written instruction, I said gently. On Thanksgiving. He looked ashamed. It was supposed to be practical, he muttered. Practical. Reducing a person to utility often sounds practical. I am not staff, I said softly. I know, he replied quickly. Do you? Silence again. Heavy. Honest. He exhaled slowly. What do we need to do? Now we were finally having the right conversation. I sat up straighter. We establish clarity, I said. You live here as family, not as inheritors in waiting. He nodded. You contribute to expenses. All of them. Property taxes included. You consult me before making decisions about this house. He didn't argue. Because fairness sounds different than punishment. And the trust? He asked quietly. It has been amended, I said. It reflects reality now. Which is? That respect determines legacy. He absorbed that. Not defensively, but seriously. I'll talk to Amanda, he said. That would be wise. He stood to leave, then paused. Mom, were you going to throw us out? No drama. Just curiosity mixed with fear. I considered the question carefully. No, I said truthfully. I was prepared to. That distinction matters. Prepared is not impulsive. Prepared is controlled. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry, he said. Simple, not elaborate, but real. When he left the room, I sat quietly for a long time. Apologies are beginnings, not endings. The next morning, Amanda came downstairs first. No makeup, no sharp tone, no crossed arms, just cautious energy. Can we talk? She asked. Yes. We sat at the kitchen island. The same island she had leaned against confidently days earlier. I didn't think about how it would feel, she admitted. That's accurate, I said evenly. She swallowed. I was wrong. Those words are difficult for some people, especially when control has slipped. I don't want tension, she continued. I want stability. Stability requires acknowledgement, I replied. She nodded. We'll contribute, she said. Fully. And? I asked gently. And we'll ask, she added. There it was. Permission restored to its rightful place. Later that afternoon, we reviewed expenses together. Mortgage history, tax breakdown, utility averages. Transparency changes perspective. When numbers appear on paper, entitlement fades. By evening, something subtle had changed. Not affection, not warmth. Structure. My son replaced the old garage remotes with the updated ones I authorized. Amanda handed back the spare key she had once made without telling me. Small actions. Symbolic corrections. Before dinner, she paused near the dining table. The same place where she had left that card. I shouldn't have written that, she said quietly. No, I agreed. She looked down. I won't do that again. I believed her. Not because she feared losing the house, but because she finally understood what it represented. It was never about cleaning. It was about position. And that position had been restored. That night, as I turned off the lights in the living room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory. Not revenge. Authority. Calm. Clear. Undeniable. Thanksgiving had begun with a note that tried to reduce me. It ended with clarity that elevated me. The house on Willow Creek Drive remained the same, but the hierarchy inside it had shifted. And this time, everyone knew exactly who the homeowner was. The house grew quieter after that week. Not tense. Not fragile. Just aware. There is a difference. Respect changes the atmosphere of a home. It shows up in small things. Amanda began knocking before entering my study. My son started discussing repairs before scheduling them. The children were gently reminded, ask Grandma first. Not because I demanded obedience, but because the structure had been restored. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, we sat down at the kitchen island again, this time with spreadsheets. Not confrontation. Contribution. My son transferred his portion of the property tax directly into the household account. For the first time in years, I was not silently covering the difference. It wasn't about the money. It was about recognition. Amanda reviewed the utility statements carefully. Electric's higher than I thought, she said softly. Yes, I replied. Homes require maintenance. Ownership requires awareness. Something in her tone had changed. Less entitlement. More consideration. That Sunday evening, Amanda approached me while I was watering the indoor plants. I've been thinking about that note, she said. I waited. She continued. I wrote it quickly. I didn't see you as separate from the household. I just assumed you'd help. Assumption. That word again. I have always helped, I said calmly. She nodded. I know. Silence settled between us. But it wasn't heavy this time. It was reflective. I don't want you to feel like you have to earn your place here, she added quietly. That was new. I turned toward her. I don't earn my place, I said gently. I established it. She lowered her eyes. Not ashamed. Humbled. A few days later, she handed me something unexpected. A small envelope. Inside was a handwritten card. Not typed. Not casual. It read, Thank you for building a home we get to live in. We're sorry we forgot whose it is. Simple. Direct. No excuses. I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, next to the original note. Not to compare, but to remember. One showed assumption. The other showed growth. Over the next month, something subtle shifted within me as well. For years, I had mistaken peace for silence. I thought avoiding conflict kept families intact, but what it actually did was blur boundaries. When you give without structure, people forget where generosity ends and ownership begins. I stopped overextending myself. If Amanda needed childcare, she asked. If my son wanted to host guests, he checked first. And when I said no, occasionally, intentionally, no one argued. Because no was no longer unexpected. It was part of balance. One evening in December, we hosted a small holiday dinner. Nothing elaborate, just close friends and neighbors. As guests arrived, Amanda introduced me differently. "This is Margaret," she said warmly. "The homeowner." Not sarcastic. Not forced. Proud. I noticed the change immediately. Titles matter. Position matters. Language reflects power. Later that night, after the guests left and the dishes were drying, my son lingered near the doorway. "You know," he said quietly, "I didn't realize how much you carried." That sentence meant more than the apology. Because awareness is deeper than regret. "I carried what I chose to carry," I replied. "Now we carry it together." He nodded. And for the first time since my husband passed away, I didn't feel alone in maintaining the house. Not because I regained control, but because I stopped surrendering it. The following week, Amanda asked me something unexpected. "We're planning a short trip in January," she said cautiously. "Would you like to come with us?" I studied her expression. It wasn't obligation. It wasn't repair. It was inclusion. "I'll think about it," I said. And I meant it. Because now the invitation was real. Not assumed. Not assigned. Real. That night, I walked through the hallway slowly. The hardwood floors creaked the same way they always had. The framed photographs still lined the wall. But I saw them differently. Not as relics of what I built alone, but as reminders of what I protected properly. The note on Thanksgiving had been small. Just a few careless lines on ivory paper. But it revealed something larger. When people grow comfortable inside something you built, they may begin to mistake comfort for entitlement. It is not cruel to correct that. It is necessary. And as I turned off the lights and locked the front door, with my key, I felt something steady settle in my chest. Not triumph. Not resentment. Alignment. The house on Willow Creek Drive remained in my name. But more importantly, respect remained inside its walls. And that, more than any document, was the real correction. January came quietly. No dramatic arguments. No slammed doors. Just colder mornings and clearer air. They did go on that short trip. And this time, they asked me weeks in advance. Not with assumption. With respect. "Mom, we're thinking about 3 days in Santa Barbara," my son had said. "Would you like to come, or would you prefer the house to yourself?" Choice. That word felt different than instruction. "I'll stay," I told them. Not to prove anything. Just because I wanted quiet. The morning they left, Amanda came into the kitchen before heading out. "Thank you for watching the house," she said. Watching, not cleaning. Language matters. "I live here," I replied gently. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. When the SUV pulled away, I stood by the window again. But it felt different from Thanksgiving. Back then, I stood behind a curtain. Now, I stood openly in the doorway. Nothing secret. Nothing hidden. Just balance. The house felt peaceful. Not because they were gone, but because I no longer felt reduced inside it. That afternoon, I opened my desk drawer. 2 cards rested side by side. The first one, "Family trip, clean the house before we're back." The second, "Thank you for building a home we get to live in." Same handwriting, different awareness. Growth is visible when you look closely. I didn't keep the first card out of bitterness. I kept it as evidence. Not against them. Against myself. A reminder of what happens when silence goes on too long. Midweek, my son called. "Everything okay at the house?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It's exactly as I left it." He hesitated. "Mom, I've been thinking about something." I waited. "The trust," he said carefully. "I don't want it to feel like a test." Interesting. He was still thinking about inheritance. Not greedily. Just habitually. "It's not a test," I replied calmly. "It's a reflection." Of what? Of behavior. He was quiet. "When Dad passed," he continued slowly, "I assumed everything would naturally become ours someday." "That's common," I said. "But assumption without gratitude creates imbalance." He exhaled softly. "I don't want imbalance." For the first time, I believed him. Not because he feared losing the house, but because he understood something deeper. Comfort is not entitlement. It is privilege. When they returned 3 days later, they rang the doorbell. They still had keys, but they rang the bell. That small gesture said more than any apology. I opened the door. "Welcome home," I said. Not sarcastic. Not guarded. Just sincere. Inside, Amanda handed me a small bag. Saltwater taffy from the pier. A simple souvenir. "We thought of you," she said. Not extravagant, but intentional. Later that evening, we sat around the dining table. The same table, but no notes this time. Just conversation. At one point, Amanda laughed and said, "We almost booked a cleaning service before we left." My son glanced at her. And then, I asked gently. And then I remembered, she said quietly. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I remembered too. It wasn't about chores. It was about position. That night, after everyone went upstairs, I walked through the house slowly. The hallway lights were dim, the air warm. I paused at the front door, touched the lock. The new lock. Strong. Secure. I had changed it out of necessity, but I kept it out of principle. Boundaries once reinforced should not be casually undone. Weeks turned into months, and the structure held. Not rigid, not tense, just clear. My son began contributing consistently to long-term repairs. Amanda consulted me before hosting gatherings. Even the grandchildren began saying, "Grandma, can we?" Small words, big meaning. One afternoon in early spring, I met with my attorney again. Not urgently, just thoughtfully. We reviewed the amended trust. "Would you like to make further changes?" he asked. I considered it carefully. "No," I said. "For now, it reflects reality." He nodded. "Situations evolve," he added. "Yes," I replied. "So do people." Driving home, I realized something quietly powerful. I had prepared to remove them, prepared to stand alone if necessary. But correction had created something better than removal. It created awareness. And awareness sustains respect. When I pulled into Willow Creek Drive, the house looked the same as it always had. White siding, blue shutters, the oak tree in the front yard. But I no longer felt like a background figure in it. I felt anchored, not defensive, not watchful, anchored. Because the power shift that began with a small ivory card did not end in destruction. It ended in structure. And structure, when enforced calmly, protects everyone inside it. Spring arrived slowly. The oak tree in the front yard began to bloom again. Life has a way of continuing, even after tension. For several months, things remained steady, respectful, measured, balanced. No more assumptions. No more careless language. But change is not proven in calm seasons. It is tested when pressure returns. And pressure returned one Thursday afternoon. I was in the study reviewing property insurance paperwork when Amanda knocked lightly. "Margaret, do you have a minute?" Her tone was careful, not fearful, just intentional. "Yes," I said. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "We've been thinking about something," she began. That phrase always signals something important. My son joined her a moment later. They stood together, aligned. "We're considering refinancing," my son said. Rates dropped slightly. It could reduce monthly expenses. I listened, not reacting, just absorbing. "And?" I asked. "And we'd need to use the house as leverage," Amanda added. There it was. The house. Again. Not malicious. Not arrogant. But significant. "You'd need to use my house," I corrected calmly. They both nodded. "Yes," my son said quickly. "But it benefits all of us." Benefits. That word sounds appealing. But ownership is not communal by default. "What exactly are you asking?" I said evenly. "We'd like to add our names to the title," Amanda said. Direct. Clear. No notes this time. No hidden tone. Just a request. Silence settled in the room. But not the heavy kind from Thanksgiving. This silence was analytical. Measured. I folded my hands on the desk. "Why?" I asked. They exchanged a glance. "For security," my son said. "Long-term planning." "And if I say no?" I asked gently. They didn't hesitate this time. "Then we accept that," Amanda said. That answer mattered. Not defensive. Not entitled. Accepting. Still, I did not respond immediately. Because decisions tied to property are never emotional. They are structural. "Adding names changes authority," I said calmly. "Yes," my son acknowledged. "And authority," I continued, "once divided, cannot be casually reclaimed." They understood that now. The lesson from Thanksgiving had settled deeply. "We're not trying to take control," Amanda added. "I know," I replied. And I meant it. The tone was different. The energy was different. But clarity requires consistency. "I will not add names to the deed," I said firmly. No anger. No apology. Just truth. They both nodded slowly. "Okay," my son said. No pushback. No guilt. That was growth. However, I wasn't finished. "If long-term security is the goal," I continued, "we can explore options." Their posture shifted slightly. Open. Listening. "I can revise the trust to include defined percentages upon my passing," I explained. "Conditional on sustained contribution and mutual respect." Amanda's eyes widened slightly. "You do that?" "Yes," I said calmly. Because structure protects everyone. My son exhaled. That's fair. Fair. Not assumed. Not demanded. Fair. We spent the next hour discussing numbers. Responsibilities. Maintenance projections. Real conversation. No ivory cards. No silent expectations. Just transparency. After they left the study, I remained seated for a long moment. The test had arrived. And this time, it did not escalate. Because boundaries had already been established. That evening at dinner, nothing dramatic happened. No tension. No forced cheerfulness. Just normal life. But inside me, something settled permanently. The house was no longer a silent battleground. It was clearly defined territory. And when territory is defined, conflict decreases. Later that night, I opened the drawer again. 2 cards. Side by side. One careless. One corrective. I didn't need to keep them forever. But for now, they reminded me of something important. Respect is not maintained by generosity alone. It is maintained by clarity. Weeks passed. The refinance conversation never resurfaced. Instead, contributions continued steadily. My son paid his share without reminder. Amanda consulted before decisions. And when disagreements arose, as they naturally do in families, they were spoken. Not written. Not implied. Spoken. One afternoon, while trimming roses in the front yard, a neighbor walked by and said, "You must love having your family under your roof." I smiled. "Yes," I said, "under my roof." The phrasing was simple, but accurate. And accuracy brings peace. Because that Thanksgiving, a note tried to reposition me. It tried to reduce me to background labor in a home I built. Instead, it clarified something stronger. I am not the help. I am the foundation. And foundations do not beg for recognition. They simply hold everything up. By early summer, the house felt steady. Not perfect, but balanced. Contributions came on time. Decisions were discussed. No one assumed anything. And yet, life has a way of testing progress quietly. It wasn't another note. It wasn't another demand. It was something subtler. One Saturday morning, while I was organizing old photo albums in the living room, Amanda walked in holding a brochure. She didn't sit down immediately. She stood, thoughtful. "There's a new development about 15 minutes from here," she said. "Townhomes. Gated community. Lower maintenance." I closed the album gently. "And we were wondering," my son added from the doorway, "if it might make sense eventually." Eventually. That word carries weight. "For whom?" I asked calmly. "For you." Amanda replied quickly. "Less upkeep. Smaller space. Easier." There it was again. Not disrespect, but repositioning. The idea that I might transition out of this house. For efficiency. For convenience. For logic. "I like upkeep," I said evenly. "It keeps me engaged." They exchanged a glance. "We just thought you might want something simpler," my son said carefully. "And this house is complicated?" I asked. "No," he replied quickly. "It's just large." Large. Yes, it was. 4 bedrooms. 2.5 baths. A yard that required trimming. But it was mine. "I'm not downsizing," I said calmly. No tension. Just clarity. Amanda nodded. "Of course," she said. "We just wanted to discuss it." And that was the difference. They discussed it. They didn't plan it. They didn't assume it. Still, I watched carefully. Because suggestions about relocation often reveal long-term expectations. That evening, after dinner, I returned to my study. I opened the trust document again. Not because I doubted them, but because structure requires review. If I ever chose to move, it would be my choice. Not a gradual social push. The next week, something unexpected happened. Amanda invited me to coffee. Just the 2 of us. Public place. Neutral ground. We sat across from each other quietly at first. "I want you to know," she began. "We're not trying to move you out." I stirred my tea slowly. "I know," I replied. She looked relieved. "But," she continued carefully, "I need to understand something." I waited. "If this house stays entirely in your control forever, where do we fit long-term?" Direct. Honest. That was new. "You fit as long as you respect the structure," I said calmly. "But ownership?" she asked. "Ownership," I replied, "is earned over time through demonstrated responsibility." She leaned back slightly. "That sounds conditional." "It is." "No anger. Just truth." She studied me for a moment. "And if we maintain it, then the trust reflects that," I said. It already did. Conditional percentages. Defined responsibilities. Clear expectations. Not emotional inheritance. Structured inheritance. She nodded slowly. That feels fair. Fair again. Fairness had replaced entitlement. When we left the cafe, she hugged me lightly. Not performative. Genuine. Weeks later, during a quiet Sunday evening, my son approached me again. I've been thinking about legacy, he said. That word used to mean automatic transfer. Now it meant responsibility. I don't want you to feel like we're waiting, he added. I don't, I said. Because I didn't. Waiting implies impatience. What I saw now was adjustment. Then what do you want, he asked. I paused before answering. I want the house to remain a place of respect, I said. After I'm gone, if it becomes yours, it should carry that structure forward. He nodded slowly. And if we ever slip? He asked quietly. I held his gaze. Then the structure changes. No threat, just consequence. He understood that now, because he had already seen what correction looked like. That summer, something became very clear to me. The note on Thanksgiving was not the true problem. It was a symptom. The true problem had been my silence before it. The quiet tolerance. The gradual erosion of position. Once corrected, the system stabilized. One evening in late June, we hosted another small gathering. Neighbors, friends, family. Amanda moved through the kitchen confidently, but respectfully. My son handled the grill outside. At one point, someone asked casually, So, Margaret, are you thinking about passing this beautiful house down someday? I didn't hesitate. One day, I said calmly. When it's deserved. No one laughed. No one challenged it. Because the tone wasn't dramatic. It was grounded. Later that night, after everyone left, I walked through the quiet house again. Same hardwood floors. Same oak tree outside. Same lock on the door. But something inside me had shifted permanently. I was no longer guarding against displacement. I was guarding structure. And structure is not emotional. It is steady. The Thanksgiving note had once tried to reposition me. Now, months later, the position was undeniable. Not because I demanded it loudly, but because I enforced it calmly. And as long as I hold the deed, respect holds the house. By early fall, nearly a year had passed since that Thanksgiving dinner. The oak tree in the front yard was beginning to change color again. Seasons have a way of reminding you how much can shift in 12 months. The house on Willow Creek Drive remained steady. Bills were shared. Repairs were discussed. Voices were measured. No one left notes anymore. But clarity requires more than behavior. It requires permanence. One Tuesday morning, I scheduled another meeting with my attorney. Not urgently, deliberately. When I walked into his office, he smiled. Everything stable? He asked. Yes, I replied. That's why I'm here. Stability is when you make decisions, not when you react. We reviewed the amended trust again. Conditional inheritance. Defined contribution. Behavioral clauses. It was thorough, but something still felt unfinished. I want to add something, I said calmly. He adjusted his glasses. What would you like to include? I folded my hands on the desk. A residence clause. He nodded for me to continue. The house may be inherited, I said, but it cannot be sold immediately. He paused. For how long? 5 years, I replied. Silence. That's specific, he noted. It needs to be, I said, because houses are not just assets. They are anchors. If one day this home becomes theirs, it should not become a transaction. It should remain a responsibility. He drafted the addition. 5-year occupancy requirement. No immediate liquidation. Maintenance obligations intact. Clear. Structured. Firm. When I signed the document, I didn't feel dramatic. I felt aligned. Later that evening, I called my son into the study. Amanda followed a moment later. They both sensed something important. I updated the trust, I said. They sat down. No fear this time. Just attention. I've added a residency clause, I explained. Amanda blinked. What does that mean? It means, I said evenly, that if this house passes to you one day, it must remain a home for at least 5 years. My son leaned back slightly. You think we'd sell it? I think circumstances change, I replied. And structure protects memory. They absorb that quietly. And if we wanted to move? Amanda asked. Then you maintain it, I said. Or you rent it responsibly. But you do not flip it. No one argued. Because this was no longer about control. It was about legacy. My son nodded slowly. That's fair. Fair again. It had become the theme of our family. Not dominance. Not entitlement. Fairness. Amanda surprised me next. I'm glad you did that, she said softly. I looked at her carefully. Why? Because it shows you're planning with us in mind, she replied. Planning with not guarding against. That difference mattered. Weeks later, something small but significant happened. A neighbor stopped by with mail that had been delivered incorrectly. While chatting on the porch, she said casually, "You're lucky to have your son and his wife taken care of." "You." I smiled gently. "They live with me." I corrected politely. Not defensive, just accurate. Language reflects position, and I no longer allowed subtle misplacements. That evening, Amanda approached me again. "I used to think ownership meant security," she said thoughtfully. "And now?" I asked. "Now I think structure is security." She had learned. Not through fear, through experience. As Thanksgiving approached again, I found myself thinking about that original note. Not with anger, but with perspective. 1 year ago, a small ivory card tried to reposition me. Now, nearly 12 months later, the structure of this house was stronger than ever. Not because I removed them, but because I corrected the foundation. On the night before Thanksgiving, Amanda came into the dining room while I was setting the table. She held something in her hand. Another card. She placed it gently in front of me. For a brief second, memory flashed. But this time, she spoke first. "May I?" she asked. "Permission." I nodded. She opened the card and read aloud. "We're grateful for the woman who built this home and taught us how to respect it." No instructions. No assumptions. Just acknowledgement. I didn't cry. I don't cry easily. But I felt something steady settle in my chest. Not pride. Not triumph. Resolution. Because correction, when done calmly, doesn't destroy families. It recalibrates them. And as I looked around the table, at my son, at Amanda, at the grandchildren laughing again, I realized something important. The note had never been the end of my authority. It had been the beginning of its restoration. And now, as long as my name remains on the deed, and my standards remain clear, this house will never confuse kindness for weakness again. Thanksgiving passed peacefully. No notes. No tension. No quiet power struggles hidden in polite smiles. But real change is never proven during celebration. It is proven during inconvenience. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, the furnace stopped working. December in our town does not wait patiently. By evening, the temperature inside the house had already dropped to 62 degrees. Amanda looked worried. The children were bundled in blankets. My son was on the phone with 3 different repair services. The earliest appointment? For days out. I watched quietly. Not to judge. To observe. Years ago, this would have turned into chaos. Blame. Frustration. Financial tension. Instead, something different happened. My son walked into the living room and said, "I'll cover emergency service rates if we can find one." I should have scheduled maintenance sooner. Ownership. No deflection. Amanda followed with, "I'll call around neighboring towns." No complaints. No suggestion that I should handle it. This was their home too now. In responsibility, not entitlement. By 9 o'clock that night, we secured an emergency repair. Expensive. After hours. Not convenient. When the technician finished, my son handed me the invoice. "I'll transfer my portion tomorrow," he said. I glanced at the total. Then I looked at him. "Your portion?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes. We share maintenance." Not hesitation. Not expectation that I would absorb it. Structure had become instinct. The next morning, I woke early. The house was warm again. The oak tree outside was bare now. Winter had arrived fully. Over coffee, Amanda joined me at the kitchen table. "I used to think living here meant comfort," she said quietly. "And now?" I asked. "It means responsibility." She wasn't complaining. She was reflecting. "That's what makes comfort sustainable," I replied. Later that week, something even more telling happened. A letter arrived in the mail. Property tax reassessment. Higher than expected. Significantly higher. My son read it carefully. Then he sat down beside me. "We'll adjust," he said. Not, "Can you handle it?" Not, "Maybe we should reconsider downsizing." Just, "We'll adjust." He pulled out his laptop and began reviewing their household budget. Amanda joined him. They discussed childcare expenses, streaming subscriptions, vacation plans. They cut a spring trip. Without drama. Without resentment. Because maintaining position requires sacrifice. And for the first time since they moved in, I didn't feel like the foundation alone. That evening, I returned to my study. I opened the trust document again. Not out of suspicion. Out of reflection. The residency clause. The behavioral structure. The contribution framework. All intact. All balanced. But something inside me had shifted again. Power, when constantly defended, becomes exhausting. Power, when respected, becomes quiet. I realized I was no longer monitoring them. I was living. Weeks later, just before Christmas, my son approached me privately. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "That's usually how important conversations start," I replied lightly. He smiled. "I don't want to wait for inheritance to prove anything," he continued. My attention sharpened. "I'd like to start contributing toward the mortgage. Formally, even if it's symbolic." There was no mortgage. The house had been paid off for years. "I don't owe anything," I said gently. "I know," he replied. "But I owe stewardship." Stewardship. That word mattered. Not ownership. Not expectation. Stewardship. I studied him carefully. "You understand that contribution doesn't accelerate transfer," I said evenly. "I know," he answered. "It accelerates trust." That was the correct answer. Because trust cannot be demanded. It is built through consistency. We created a formal monthly contribution agreement. Documented. Transparent. Voluntary. Not required by the trust. Chosen by them. That evening, Amanda knocked softly on my study door. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on us after last year." I looked at her calmly. "I didn't fight you," I said. "I corrected position." She nodded slowly. "And we needed that." There it was. Acknowledgement without humiliation. Growth without drama. As Christmas lights appeared across the neighborhood, I found myself walking through the house again one quiet night. The same hardwood floors. The same framed photographs. The same oak tree outside. But this time, something felt different. Not guarded. Not defensive. Settled. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was a structure. And structures, when reinforced properly, do not collapse under minor storms. They hold. Nearly 1 full year had passed since that Thanksgiving note. One small card had tried to reposition me. Now, 12 months later, position was unquestioned. Not because I forced it loudly, but because I enforced it consistently. And as long as my name remains on the deed, and responsibility remains shared, this house will never confuse generosity with surrender again. The second Thanksgiving arrived quietly. No tension. No performance. No unspoken calculation sitting at the edge of the table. Just warmth. The oak tree outside stood bare again. Just as it had the night everything changed a year ago. I remember that first Thanksgiving clearly. The folded ivory card. The words. The assumption. You stay and clean. That wasn't a request. It was repositioning. And I almost accepted it. Almost. But this year was different. This year, no one placed anything on the table without asking. Amanda moved through the kitchen with calm efficiency, but she paused often. "Margaret, is this how you used to set it?" She didn't assume tradition. She asked for it. My son carved the turkey carefully. Not at the head of the table, but slightly to the side. Small details matter. Position matters. When everyone finally sat down, I remained at the head. Not because I demanded it, but because no one questioned it. Dinner unfolded easily. Stories. Laughter. Grandchildren arguing over pie flavors. At one point, my youngest grandson climbed onto my lap and whispered, "Grandma, this is your house, right?" I looked at him gently. "Yes," I said. "But one day, it will be yours to take care of. Not to own. To take care of." Later that evening, after dishes were washed and leftovers packed, Amanda approached me again. No audience. No stage. Just us. She handed me something small. Another card. I held it in my hand for a moment. Memory flickered again, the first one. The command. This one felt different. I opened it. Inside, in her handwriting. "Thank you for teaching us that respect builds a home, not entitlement." I read it twice. Slowly. Then I folded it and placed it in my pocket. Not on the table. With me. Because this one wasn't a directive. It was acknowledgement. As the house grew quiet that night, I walked through each room. The living room where the furnace had failed. The kitchen where conversations had shifted. The study where legal documents had been rewritten. Each space held a chapter. But none of them held resentment anymore. What happened that first Thanksgiving could have fractured us permanently. I could have reacted with fury. With eviction. With public humiliation. Instead, I chose structure. Structure feels cold in the beginning. It feels rigid. But over time, it becomes stability. I didn't fight for dominance. I restored alignment. And alignment gave everyone room to grow. The truth is this. The note was never the betrayal. The betrayal was the quiet belief that I would accept being diminished. And once that belief was corrected, everything else followed. A year ago, they returned from vacation to locked doors. This year, they returned from the grocery store with fresh flowers for the dining table. Small difference. Massive meaning. Before going to bed, my son knocked gently on my door. "Mom," he said. I haven't heard that tone in his voice in years. Not defensive. Not rushed. Just steady. "I'm proud of the way this house feels now." I nodded. "So am I." He hesitated. "You could have pushed us out." "Yes," I replied calmly. "But then you wouldn't have learned." He smiled slightly. "And you wouldn't have trusted us again." Trust. That word carries more weight than ownership ever will. When he left the room, I sat quietly by the window. The street outside was still, calm. 1 year ago, someone implied the street was where I belonged. Now, the house behind me stood stronger than ever. Because strength does not shout. It holds. If there is one thing I've learned at this stage of life, it's this. Kindness without boundaries invites erosion. But boundaries delivered with dignity build legacy. I did not lose my family. I refined it. I did not surrender my authority. I clarified it. And today, as I sit in the same chair where I once unfolded that first humiliating note, I feel something deeper than victory. I feel peace. Because this house, these walls, this oak tree, this table, they no longer stand on assumption. They stand on respect. And as long as my name remains on the deed, and my standards remain clear, no one in this family will ever confuse generosity with weakness again.